Okay, so we obviously have a test due next week. We have, I should have open. I mean, I might open it several days ahead of time. So, but I'll let you guys know. Post an announcement. There will be an automatic post of the announcement. But I'll probably add to it, modify the announcement so that everybody can see kind of what to do and make sure that they're all prepared before they go in to take the test. But I think you're pretty much on track because you read everything and even more than you had to. But I wanted to, what?
I just laughed a little.
Well, yeah, the fact that you already read Everyman is rather funny, um,
It was
but
good.
oh, I like it. I think it's fun. So, but I love Shakespeare, so that's stuff I could read over and over again. But I'm a complete nerd, so that's good. I'm unashamed about that. But I also love Nathaniel Hawthorne, and we'll probably do the Metamorphosis. Mostly, like we'll just do this short story today, and then I'll talk about Metamorphosis on Thursday morning with the other class. So, but Nathaniel Hawthorne is probably best known for two of his novels. One was or is The Scarlet Letter, and that's, in my opinion, I probably like it better than The House of Seven Gables, but they're both good books. And actually, The House of Seven Gables is, I don't know, it's kind of, it's a little Poish, but they wrote at equivalent times. He's actually kind of a contemporary of Poe's, although they really didn't hang out together. Poe lived in Maryland, and Nathaniel Hawthorne lived in New England. Nathaniel Hawthorne, though, it's funny that I have us read this one because it's about essentially the scientist who wants to make his beautiful wife perfect. And there are quite a few short stories that Nathaniel Hawthorne has written that deal with this kind of scientific perfection. And very often they are about men or husbands or, male suitors or something like that who see, they love or they think they're in love with a woman, and yet they see one particular element about them that drives them crazy. He actually has one, and I can't remember exactly I have to remember the title, but it's essentially this man falls in love with a woman who always wears a red ribbon around her neck. Like it's just a ruby red color, but it's always tied like a choker around her neck. And he keeps bugging her, why do you always wear that? No matter what you're wearing, you wear that red choker. And she says, oh, just leave it alone and leave it alone, leave it alone. And he finally one night removes it. Like he marries her and they should live happily ever after, but one night he just can't stand it and he removes the choker and her head pops off. Like it's what was holding her head magically on her body. And it's Rappaccini's daughter is the one. I'll have to put this down for a second. Yeah, Rappaccini's daughter. And I don't think that's I think it's actually two P's and I don't know what else. But Rappaccini's daughter has actually been made into a film. It's very watchable too. It's quite cool. But in that case, the young man who falls in love with her, doesn't understand exactly what her father has done to her. So her father is the one who knows all about poisons and about poisonous plants, and he raised her among the plants, and he essentially imbued her. Yes, and Beatrice is like, it's one of the more holy names to give a girl, I guess. In fact, I told you about the Dante's Inferno and Paradiso and everything. And Beatrice is a woman who Dante knew, who actually had passed away, but she had called on the angels to essentially guide Dante. So she's his guide through purgatory and paradise. She's the one who guides him. So her name's Beatrice as well. But Rappaccini is the one who manipulates scientifically manipulates his daughter and essentially makes it so that there's no way that she can ever have a normal life, because she's poisonous, essentially. And so, but this manipulation, it's actually very much like, or as close as we have an equivalent, is something like Frankenstein, where a man who's, and it's not really, it's funny because we always talk about the Frankenstein monster, but he's actually not a monster. They never say the word monster in the book. He's the creature. But the real monster is Victor Frankenstein, because he thinks, oh, I can be a god and I can create something. And he does. He actually puts life together from body parts and everything. But what he doesn't understand is how horrifying what he's created is. And the whole point of the book is not so much that the monster's horrible or it's going to kill people. It's that this man felt he could be a god. And because of that, he actually creates a problem. And the creature is amazing. He's lucid and intelligent and capable, but he looks scary. And so what he wants to do is not to harm anybody. He wants to go be able to, he wants a bride, a wife. So, some counterpart who looks just as horrifying as he does, so that they can go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. And Victor Frankenstein won't do it. He thinks he's creating another monster. So it's much more, it's a psychological novel, but it's also dealing with very much this kind of thing, which is, it's kind of funny because in some ways Hawthorne even writes about this in his diaries. He is upset with himself at times because he is, no matter how good things are, no matter how good someone is, he is always looking at flaws. And I think all of these people in some ways represent him, because he's always trying to perfect something. And some of it is his writing. He tries to perfect his own writing. Some of it is trying to perfect other people. And I think he recognizes that that's not a very nice thing to do. And it's destructive to relationships. It destroys people's happiness, and it's funny because I always try to bring this up because it's just kind of who he was. I actually knew somebody who was a huge American Lit fan, and she was a young woman, and she thought he was the handsomest man she'd ever met. So I'm just going to move. Here's a portrait of Nathaniel Hawthorne. And as he got older, his hair kind of stayed the same, except it got gray, but he looked a lot less cute. But she just thought she literally had printed this like an 8x10 up on her, and she just had it in her office so she could look at him every day because she thought he was so pretty. So I guess in some ways she thought, oh, there's perfect right there, but maybe he paid too much attention to that kind of outward appearance. And it thinks, and probably rightly, he thinks it may be what made him kind of unhappy. And so had he been less, attuned to that and less nitpicky, and maybe if we all just kind of left each other alone, maybe we'd be happier, and we wouldn't make each other so miserable. There's actually a song, and it's one that's honestly, it had an effect on me even more than this story did. I read this story a long time ago first, but and it's something like everybody wants somebody to be their own piece of clay. Like, we're all very willing to work on someone else and fix them, and yet there's essentially a question in there: do we have the right to do that? Do we have the right to place expectations on other people that they be perfect, or constantly correct them until they are, in our view, perfect? And the truth is there's so many times in our lives when we've probably had other people dictate our behavior, what's pretty and what isn't. Like, oh, I don't, you like that dress because that looks hideous. And, we try to change their mind and get them to conform to what we see as ideal. And we also, even if something is mostly great, sometimes we learn to nitpick at ourselves and find what's not so great. And we pick at that, and that's all we focus on instead of at all the stuff that's good. And sometimes we're taught to do this, unfortunately. There are parents who aren't who don't do it. Sometimes they're in this caught up in the same struggle, but they don't, they want their kids to be perfect. And so they try to mold them into that. We also have media, social media, and the media in general. If you look at magazine covers and all the photoshopped stuff, everybody is supposed to be perfect. And the truth is we're none of us, not, we're not perfect. None of us are perfect. Even those fancy models, okay, they already have a very stringent diet and they already go through all this other stuff to be models. And yet, even when they get pictures taken, those pictures are photoshopped on top of that. And there's been quite a backlash for that, where a lot of models will say, no, post the photo that's real, not the fake photo. Post what I actually look like, because that's not fair. That's not right to give people an unrealistic idea of what people are supposed to look like. I mean, even Barbie, even though the movie that came out, and I did see it, it was supposed to be that, I don't know, feminist, whatever. The truth is a lot of people don't like Barbie because Barbie's unrealistic. And it kind of pokes fun at that in the movie. And yet it's been a source of, it's been a problem. It's been a criticism of Barbie for decades, ever since Barbie came out, pretty much. The woman, if a woman actually looked like her, she'd have a 16-inch waist and she'd be 6'5", and that just doesn't make any sense. And so even those parameters are to us unrealistic. And so how do we find our place and find comfort in who we are if people set up for us these unrealistic things that we can't possibly meet, because there is no such thing as perfect. And so this kind of speaks to something that honestly Nathaniel Hawthorne struggled with for a long time in his life. And even the book, The Scarlet Letter, and his other novel, The House of Seven Gables, are really dealing with the fact that he's always had this issue too with sin. And does sin show? Would people know? Or how do we hide sin, and what happens when we hide it? What happens generationally? That's what House of Seven Gables deals with, is, when grandparents and great grandparents have done horrible things, well, especially grandfathers, how does that get resolved eventually? How do the kids make up for the sins of the fathers and grandfathers? And the reason he was so attuned to that is because his great grandfather was one of the judges in the Salem witch trials. And he definitely had a hand in the deaths of many people, because he helped conduct the trials and the tests. Yes. And so for Hawthorne, he felt in some ways that he was automatically blemished because, he carried the sin of his great grandfather with him. And because he was, and if he did anything to continue that, he was just carrying the sin further. And where does it stop? And that's kind of where the House of Seven Gables is how does the young generation stop the sin of the past generations? And it has a happy ending. So it's actually, I liked it. It was a good book. In The Scarlet Letter, it deals much more with, and of course, he came from a Puritan society. He lived in Massachusetts, which started out as Puritans, and they were very rigid, had a very rigid social structure, extremely strict rules of dress, of comportment, because the assumption was they were going by the Calvinist idea that if you were sinful, that meant you were already destined for hell, that you were predestined. It's actually a theory that Calvin will come up with once we have the Protestant Reformation. And so if you do naughty things, or you say naughty words, or you do bad, you do sinful acts and you're caught, that means that, well, see, you were already destined for hell anyway. So you have to be on the outside very, very pristine. No one can catch you at anything. So what it led to was this system where people would hide their sin. So Hester Prynne in that novel, in the Scarlet Letter, is a rarity. Her sin was caught out, the sin of adultery. And so she was forced to wear publicly a letter A, the scarlet letter A, on her dress. And it shows how different her life becomes because she has her sin publicly portrayed. Other people who sin hide it, and it eats away at their soul because they're living a lie. And so in some ways Hawthorne is saying, look, we need to be who we truly are and not put up a front, not worry about the surface material and the outside of ourselves. The outside needs to match the inside, and we need to be honest, or it will eat at us. We have to deal with truth, and we have to be honest about it, about who we are, our imperfections, our sins, our mistakes. Otherwise, we can't go forward. And so Hester Prynne ends up becoming a far stronger, more effective woman, actually, because she's wearing the A, until the next generation essentially is asked, well, what does the A mean? Because they don't even know. And somebody says, I think it means angel, because she's such a good person. And then other people are literally destroyed emotionally because they are hiding the sin that they have. And so it's a really interesting idea, what is it that is really who we are, and how much of that shows on the surface? How much do we hide? And what effect does that have, not only on the society, but on the individual? And so in some ways, this is, going along with much of that. And these are pretty deep ideas, and yet they're ones that I don't know that he ever truly resolved. He just wrote stories that investigated through them. So in some ways they were sort of therapeutic. But a lot of them have, kind of magical, things going on. A lot of things, you could certainly see them as kind of like at least fantasy, if not science fiction, at least for the time period. In this case, though, we have, it's a very small cast. We have essentially Georgiana and Aylmer, and he was a scientist, in some people say, well, it really at that time it meant something like an alchemist, where he can do things with chemicals that make magical things happen, And it even says he was a skillful scientist who had experienced a spiritual reaction more striking than any chemical one. And the spiritual side, so we have the scientific element, and then we have the spiritual element, and that's his attraction to Georgiana. And she is gorgeous. She is beautiful. And so, but he was a scientist who loved science and yet also was in love with her. And yet these two sides are kind of juxtaposed against each other. At least in this story, they are. So for so long, all he thought about was science. And now suddenly he thinks about his wife, and he manages to woo her and win her, and she marries them. But very soon, I mean, like almost not, it says one day, very soon after their marriage, it could have been a week. It doesn't say exactly. Could have been a few days. Here, they have a really quick honeymoon, come home. He comes, back from his laboratory, looks at his wife and goes, wait a second. And suddenly what didn't matter to him, it's kind of like, the husband in Desiree's Baby, oh, it doesn't matter to me. She's beautiful. It doesn't matter to me. Nothing matters, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it matters. And he looks at her and says, have you ever considered that mark upon your cheek might be removed? So she has one thing, and it's like a birthmark. And it's on her face. Now, have you known people with birthmarks? Because I have.
If I haven't paid that much attention to it.
Well, I knew one who had like a brown kind of blob, like on one side of his face, just like literally, it almost looked like a teardrop coming down from his eye. And I've known people with, something on their neck or something on their chin or something, but they were just, when they were born, there it was, and she has a very interesting one. It's kind of cute. I think it's cute, but it's this super tiny handprint, like a fairy handprint, just pop on her cheek. It's left cheek, I guess. So in the center of Georgiana's left cheek, this is where it is. There was a mark deep in her skin. The mark was usually deep red in color. When Georgiana blushed, the mark became less visible, but when she turned pale, there was the mark like a red stain upon snow. The birthmark would come and go with the emotions. And it said it was shaped like a very small human hand. And other people, like the other guys who wooed her, had said that it was the hand of a magical fairy that, had touched her face. And many a gentleman would have risked his life for the honor of kissing that mysterious hand on her face. But other people had different opinions. And most of the people, like the women, just said it destroyed the effect of Georgiana's beauty. But you can assume they're just a bit jealous, because she's supposed to be really pretty. And they were like, oh, she's awful now because she has that little hand on her face, And then the men, male observers who did not praise the mark, simply wished it away so that I did not see it. And after his marriage, so not until after he married her, but then he starts thinking, wait, this is probably me. Like, I would rather that I just never see it. It bothers me enough that I wish I just saw like the other side of her face or something, because I wished it wasn't there. It bothered him. And so she's beautiful. And all he thinks about is how beautiful she is. And yet, once they're married, almost immediately he turns around and says, have you ever thought about getting rid of it? And she says, the mark has so often been called a charm that I was simple enough to imagine it might be so. Like, I thought it was cute. And people have said that, and so I kind of, I just thought it was cute. And he says on another face, it might be a charm, but not on yours. No, dear. Nature made you so perfectly that this small defect shocks me as being a sign of earthly imperfection. Like, well, because the rest of you is so perfect, it's just bad. And then she says, well, then why did you marry me? And that's a very fair question. Like, if you're that bothered by something that is just a part of what I look like, and I've always looked like this, and this is nothing new, why did you marry me in the first place? Now, do we though? And this is something just without it being a hand mark on your face or something. Have you known people who got married and said, oh, this, my future husband, they're affianced, they're engaged. And he goes, oh, but he's such a slob. And then you say, well, okay. And it's so annoying. Well, it's not going to get better. Oh, yes, it will. I'll fix him. It'll take a year, but I'll get him trained up. And I'm thinking, that's not going to work so good. But there are plenty of people who said, oh, like one person, I still remember, because I'm squishy. I'm not super squishy, but I am squishy. And I was always squishy. I've always been a little squishy. And my mother-in-law actually told Richard, my husband, well, she's already kind of chubby. What are you going to do about that? And he goes, oh, don't worry. I'll put her on a diet. That's what he said originally. And I disabused him of that. Like, nope, that's my job. I get to take care of those things. And he was a very immature young man. Now he's not. But it's amazing what 30 years will do. But I didn't train him to be something else. Instead, I trained him, look, I'm in charge of me, And the truth is, do we try to fix other people? You just
Sometimes,
look
yeah.
better if you have a different haircut, or that color is not good on you, or if you were just a little taller, which is so weird. What a weird thing to say, because people are just taller, they're short. Do we pick at people for their stuff if
Sometimes,
their nose
yeah.
is big? What have you been picked on for? Just being
Mm,
realistic. I told you my squishy part, so Has anybody, like in the past, even in school?
oh, one time I used to take dance classes,
Mm-hmm.
and one time this boy, we were really young, and he just turns around and he looks at me, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he's like, your teeth are pointy. You look like a vampire. And I like stories like that, so I was like,
Okay.
thanks.
Yeah. And then you go home and you go, Mom, I want to be a vampire for Halloween. And the mom's like, what?
She'd probably go along with it.
Yeah, probably. I would too. But I mean, the truth is we can take what's realistic about ourselves and go, yeah, I'm squishy. Or we can we can take it to heart the way that Aylmer really wants. What does he want from Georgiana more than anything else?
Seems like perfection.
Yeah, and this is the only thing. If she just fixes this one thing, she'd be absolutely perfect. But the truth is anybody ever perfect?
No.
No. I had one friend and she says, I just can't dance. And I said, well, no one's perfect. And she goes, oh, that's exactly how I should think about it. No one's perfect. Because she can do a lot of other things. But the truth is can I do no, I can't. Can I do ballet? No. And I will never be able to do ballet. I can't point my toes because it actually locks my legs up. It's just not good. But there are a lot of things I can do. I'm never going to be a coder as far as coding on the computer. It's just never going to happen. I'm too old, I think, to learn it, and it looks incomprehensible. But I can still learn other languages. I just can't do that. And I don't want to, which is, I'm stubborn, I guess. But nobody's perfect, and nobody can do everything. But the truth is what is he really picking at? Is there anything about her personality that he makes any comment on, or about her character, or any of the inner things of who she is?
It doesn't seem that way.
No, he's only concerned with what she looks like. Now, do we know people like this, where their actual character, their actual personality, their ability to, have a conversation doesn't matter. It's only what they look like in a bathing suit.
There
Or,
seem to be people like that out there.
yeah, it's all surface. Well, but the truth is even with social media, that happens a lot where people will, here's how to make yourself look more perfect. And here's how to get rid of those flabby arms. And here's where to, how to make your eyes look larger. And even those the little filters they have on things like Snapchat, that make your eyes bigger and give you long eyelashes and makeup and stuff. And it's, I still remember my daughter posted a Snapchat photo she'd made that used the filter with, and somebody says, I didn't even know your eyes were that big. And I'm looking at it going, they're not. That's fake. And so, but Crystal didn't comment. She just said, oh, thank you, like that. So I go to her and I go, but your eyes don't look like that, darling. That's fake. And she goes, well, I'm just using a filter. I said, right. So when someone says, wow, your eyes are so much bigger than I thought, well, that's fake. It's like Photoshop, y'all. But to her, she was getting compliments on something that she'd never gotten compliments on, so it was worth the fake part. But the truth is do we do that? I mean, I wear makeup. I do. Other people you wear clothes that are trying to hide the imperfections and then point out the good stuff, so we're all trying to kind of modify what we look like. We try to wear stuff that that shows us to advantage. But do we, I mean, and we do often try to work at something that we see as an imperfection, especially a physical imperfection. And yet for Georgiana, up until this point, everything that she's been is plenty. And she's never thought of herself as, well, that hand on your face, it's kind of gross, it's shocking. She just thought it was cute. And yet what happens to her when Aylmer, and he's honest with how he feels about it, but he actually had, of course he sees it what he sees it as, it even says during a period that should have been their happiness, Elmer could only think of this disastrous subject. In the morning light, Aylmer opened his eyes upon his wife's face and recognized the sign of imperfection. When they sat together in the evening near the fire, he would look at the mark. And she knows. I mean, he doesn't say, wow, that's gross every time he sees it, but she knows. She knows what he thinks. And she says, at one point, she says, do you remember, of course, when she gets all, when she sees his look, she gets all pale, and that makes the hands stand out even more. But she says, do you remember about the dream you had last night about this hateful mark? And he says, no, I don't remember, none, whatever. And Then he remembered his dream. He'd imagined himself with his assistants, Amenadab, trying to remove the birthmark with an operation. But the deeper his knife went, the deeper the small hand sank until it caught hold of Georgiana's heart. Now, this dream is a prophetic dream because he's dreaming about trying to remove the birthmark. And it's essentially, the dream is telling him the birthmark is an integral part of who she is, and it cannot be removed without removing her. And yet he just doesn't get it. But he felt guilty because he'd had that dream, and remembering, he must have told her about it too, which is even sad. But finally she says, Aylmer, I do not know what the cost would be to both of us to remove this birthmark. Removing it could deform my face or damage my health. And what's his answer?
He thinks it can be removed.
Oh, I think it can be removed. No, he doesn't say that. He says, I am sure it can be removed. But she even says, what if it makes me look hideous? What if it deforms my face? Not just a little, a hand mark, but all of a sudden the whole cheek is horrible or something. You can imagine almost anything. And so he says, I'm sure it can be removed. And she says, life is not worth living while this hateful mark makes me the object of your horror. And this, probably more than anything, a couple of students remarked on this, but this more than anything else reminds me of Desiree's baby.
Oh, yeah.
Because here's this man who thought he loved her until he found out that, at least in his mind, she was part Black. And that was it. He was done. And so what did she do? She could have gone home to mom, but instead she essentially said the same thing. Life is not worth living while this hateful mark makes me the object of your horror. Life, it's not worth it to me to stay alive and go back home to my mom who loves me, because you don't love me anymore, because you are horrified by the fact that I'm Black. I have to go and kill myself and the baby. And that's what she does. And so Georgiana is essentially facing exactly the same thing. So she sees him and says, okay, you say you're the scientist, you're the one with all this experience. Go ahead. I'll let you, even if it costs me my life, remove this little mark for the sake of your peace and my own. Because it bothers you, I'm willing to risk my life so that it doesn't bother you anymore, which is a tremendous sacrifice to make. But of course, he is sure. Do not doubt my power. And the husband gently kissed her right cheek, the one without the red hand on it. So essentially, he works on her. He tries a series of powerful experiments, but the mark doesn't come off. And so she's reading through his notebooks while she's waiting, and she could not help but see that many of his experiments had ended in failure. And so she goes to see him at work. But the truth is he did fail a lot. So the fact that he says, I am sure, is really, that's where we get to this, what we call overweening pride or hubris. It's like the same thing that makes Victor Frankenstein think he can create a life. You don't place yourself in the role of God. Don't think that you can fix nature. And that's what this guy's doing. Nature's imperfect. He's going to perfect nature. And he's really tense about all of this. So she notices he's nervous and pale as death as he worked on preparing a liquid. And she realizes that he's more scared about this than he admitted to her, because he said, I'm sure, don't doubt me. I know I can do this. And essentially she says, be honest with me about the risks. Don't lie to me. I'll drink whatever you make for me, even if it's poison. So she puts too much really, trust. No one should have that kind of control over another human being. But he says, nothing shall be hidden. I've already given you chemicals power enough to change your entire physical system. Only one thing remains to be tried. And if that fails, he says, we are ruined. But what really happens if they can't get the blemish off? Well, then she's imperfect. Is that really that bad? And to him, it's horrifying. But to all the rest of us, you know, so I'm not, so what? Who cares? You get a scar because you got a cut or you got in an accident or something. That scar doesn't make you like all of a sudden, a nuisance or worth killing or, it's kind of ridiculous that he says all of this and makes it so important, so crucial, I guess, that she gets fixed. And so hours later, he comes with a crystal glass of colorless liquid. And he says the chemical process went perfectly. Unless all my sciences tricked me, it cannot fail. And the truth is, it sort of doesn't. To test the liquid, he placed a drop in the soil of a dying flower growing in a pot in the room. In a few moments, the plant became healthy and green once more. So it's essentially to perfect nature. And she goes, I do not need proof. Give me the glass. I'm happy to put my life in your hands. And she immediately falls asleep after she drinks the liquid. So he's taking notes, he's the scientist, and he stares at the birthmark. And slowly, with every breath that came and went, it lost some of its brightness. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's nearly gone. Yay! So they're cheering. And he opened the window coverings to see her face in daylight, but she was very pale. And she tries to smile when she sees that the mark is almost invisible. And then she says, my poor Aylmer, you have aimed so high. With so high and pure a feeling, you have rejected the best the earth could offer. I am dying, dearest. So she's like the most beautiful woman in the world, and he has rejected what she was as not enough. And because of that, he has to learn his lesson the hard way, and that's that she's going to die. And it says it was true. The hand on her face had been her link to life. As the last trace of color disappeared from her cheek, she gave her last breath. So here's the lesson. Don't mess with what's not broken. Don't expect anything to be perfect. Don't demand the right to change someone else into some vision of what you think they should be. All of that is overreaching, and you will get burned. Now, in real life, this is not of course, this is magical, and no one has something that just makes a birthmark disappear and then people die, Instead, what happens in this situation? In real life, somebody wants to change their spouse or significant other. What happens?
It may tear their relationship apart.
Exactly. If they say, no, you will be this, or we will not be together, the other person may say, great, go away. We are done. It may be that they succumb to it and they do what the other person wants them to, they turn into that person. And yet, are they really themselves? It may
No.
be much more of a think about like the story of an hour. Maybe he thought, Mr. Mallard thought that all of his suggestions to his wife and stuff were all loving suggestions, and she wanted to obey him and all of that. And maybe he was absolutely stifling her. And so when she thought he was dead, that's why she felt free. I mean, the truth is we don't know much about their relationship, but when you feel as if someone is constantly judging you, that's a hard place to be. And it's not an equal position. So it's not like Georgiana says to Aylmer, well, you have a wart on your nose. Why don't you get rid of that? Which is a pretty common thing. I'd say if somebody is to pick at me, well, what do? We respond back and pick at them, because it's none of their business. We get to take care of, what did they call that? Mow your own lawn. So we're supposed to mow our own lawn and not mow other people's lawns. And yet we do so much to judge other people and try to control what they do. And in reality, it's toxic. The only person you can really affect change in is yourself. When we try to affect change in other people, they either become somebody they're not to please us and lie, or they reject that and they go away and we lose the relationship that we had. In this case, though, I mean, he just made it more dramatic, made it magic. And at the same time, he lost his wife and she lost her life because she gave in to him. But she couldn't bear for him to not be pleased with her. And so if that's the only thing he picked at, well, then she'd let him fix it, even if it meant, um, I mean, the truth is too, is expecting anybody to be perfect, especially when we're not. We're so imperfect. To expect anybody else to be perfect is just kind of hilarious. And yet, it's also really destructive to only pick out. They say that what, for every one negative thing you say to somebody, you should say 10 positive things, because we do take so much, especially for the people we really care about. We take their opinions to heart, and those opinions do matter, and they can affect. I mean, think about Mabel in The Horse Dealer's Daughter, and how, even though she really hadn't spoken directly to her brothers probably in a long time, they just kind of talked around her. Think of the effect that their attitude had on who she thought she was and what she thought her value was. Had they treated her with respect and caring and genuine compassion and love, she would not have been, first of all, she would never have walked into the pond, but she would certainly never have um, been so, in some ways, frightened by and overwhelmed by the love of somebody that she only sort of knew, who saved her life. You know, in some ways it's scary for both of them because both of them are not used to receiving love from anybody. And that's kind of sad. No, it's very sad. You know, what happens if we think we're unlovable and someone actually turns out to love us? Can we accept that if we assume that we're unlovable? So, you know, it's amazing how much, even though we shouldn't be, we are shaped by the opinions and attitudes of other people. And so even though Georgiana at first thought, hey, I really like this little hand is cute, as soon as her husband says, I think it's horrifying and shocking, well, it gets to the point where she's so determined to not make it cause that reaction, and if she's willing to die for it. And that's scary. And yet, are we willing to put our lives on hold? Are we willing to hide parts of ourselves so that we're not condemned? Yep. Yep. I mean, some of us don't care, but I mean, when I get to my age, you know, I'm old enough, I'm just like, whatever. I guess I'm part of the purple hat club or something, or red hat club. I don't know, where they just don't care anymore and we wear what we want, and you know, but I still do care. I care about, especially care about my words and how much of an effect they have on other people. But I care about doing my job, you know, and I care, certainly, of all the people in the world, I care most what my husband thinks because he's, you know, my best friend. But if he were to take the same stance, would it eventually wear me down? I don't know. I hope not. It's kind of scary. And yet this is just a shocking version of reality. You know, who we are can sometimes be the very thing that people that first attracts them to us, and then they want to change. Like, I love your cheeriness. Why are you smiling all the time? You know, you can't have one without the other. Like, anything, and anything to an extreme can be annoying. But the truth is, being in a relationship involves putting up with things that can sometimes be annoying. And no one's perfect. So, but it's, I mean, I hope does that make sense? Is there anything that you think I didn't cover?
Um, seems pretty well covered to me.
Okay. I know there was a point, and I missed it when I was going through this again, where the lab assistant essentially seems, yeah, he had that idea, about the dream, but I think the lab assistant wasn't exactly super happy about doing this. I don't know if it's somewhere. I'll have to look and see if I can find it because I just didn't see it when I was going through it again. Mhm. But in essence, he had his first love science and that killed his wife. So they never were really reconciled. And some people would say he's just a narcissist and, you know, he's so busy being a scientist and making things perfect that he didn't have room for an actual love affair. Some people question too, did he actually love her at all? Since every waking thought and sleeping thought, even his dreams, were bound up in the idea of removing that hand off of her cheek. And that it's if he's that petty, is he really in love with her or not? And a lot of people, quite a few students in class said, no, I don't think he's in love with her. He says he is, but I don't think he is. Is our love that conditional, I guess, is the question. It certainly shouldn't be. That would be Hawthorne's contention. So, well, if you don't have any other questions, are you pretty well situated as far as the test and the paper? Do you feel like
I just do I remember correctly that you said that we could submit our paper like through course mail or something so you could do a quick review
mm-hmm,
to help?
yes,
Okay, I
sooner the
will probably
better.
take advantage of that.
Okay, yeah, the sooner the better. And then I'll have time. I'll try to always get it back within a day or two. So I did
So
have
do I
somebody
just
in my other class because they're a week ahead of you guys, and I did have somebody send me even if it's, oh, I just want to make sure and check this part. You don't have to send me the whole paper if you're scared to. I don't care, but I'll read the whole paper if you send it to me. If there is something specific you want me to look at, though, make sure and put it in the message so that I know so I don't neglect to answer whatever questions you might have, if that makes sense.
thank you. And I'll probably one of my main concerns is just that I get the formatting correct
Mm-hmm.
because I want to make sure I do that properly.
Excellent. I can check that. I will definitely check that when you send it.
It's not ready yet, but I send it through course mail.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. Yeah, don't accidentally submit it in the assignment because then I'd have to erase the assignment so you could submit the final. Just send it to me in course mail.
I will do that. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for coming, Jordan, and
No
have a good
problem.
evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.